And the quake's vibrations were so intense that they traveled through the air, amplifying sound waves that shook the Earth's upper atmosphere and even almost reached space. Then, the tsunami that followed had the force to travel 8,000 miles and rip straight through Antarctic icebergs the size of Manhattan. The earthquake even shook the foundations of time. It was reported by the GeoNet GPS network that the earthquake knocked the Earth off its axis by about 6.5 inches, speeding up the rotation of the Earth and making our days about 1.8 millionths of a second shorter. But despite the magnitude of this massive event, we were unprepared, and thousands of people lost their lives. These are the true threats that face nations today, and the types of real existential problems that governments worldwide should be cooperating to address. As Anatoly Permanov, former head of the Russian Space Agency and current co-chair of the Committee of the Global International Monitoring System, said in an interview with EIR in Cape Town, Africa, on October 5th, during the last 9 years, as many people died in different catastrophes, natural and man-made, as have died during the entire 20th century. So, forecasting these catastrophes and working to prevent them or mitigate their destructive effects is of the utmost importance for humanity. According to Permanov, there were plenty of warning signs before the Tohoku earthquake. We had a forecast for the Japan tsunami 7 hours before it happened, but we didn't know whom to contact. There was no such mechanism. Now, all necessary agreements, however, have been signed between Russian and Japanese emergency agencies. Had we had this previously, 82,000 people could have been saved. So that is why it is important to create a system that can forecast and not only monitor. 30 to 40% of scientists say that it is impossible to forecast. We say that it is possible, especially for such a serious event as an earthquake. Now, while some nations like Russia and China are showing a serious intention to address these real geophysical and galactic threats to mankind, the current President of the United States not only denies that we can do anything about them, but is intent on dragging the United States into the childish imperial war games of the British Empire, as we see with the continued aggravation of the Middle East as a likely tinderbox for world war. Every serious nation knows that we cannot have war among major nations ever again. If we go with that level of warfare in today's age of technology, the whole planet's finished. So what we do is we go to space. We look at defense of the planet from the top down, and we take the threats from space, from extreme weather, and from silly nations playing war games, and incorporate them into one system, which will defend mankind as a whole. That is the intention behind the latest Russian proposal for a strategic defense of the Earth, a space-based system which would guard against missiles, as well as asteroids and other threats from space. Let us briefly review the history since Lyndon LaRouche changed the entire dispute of strategic missile defense globally when he introduced his Strategic Defense Initiative under President Reagan in 1983. LaRouche knew then that if we went to war with the Soviets, we would destroy the planet, so he changed the agenda. He proposed, and layers in the United States and Soviet intelligence agreed with him, that instead of going to war, they would initiate a joint defense system in space, making nuclear weapons obsolete. This required a revolution in the current scientific capabilities of both nations that could be achieved the most quickly if both nations worked together to establish a missile defense system spanning nearly the entire planet. LaRouche warned at that time that were this policy to be rejected and the commitment to a global science driver not pursued, not only would the entire Soviet system be facing a near-term collapse, but the transatlantic system would soon follow. Out of two impossible options, the SDI was the third, but it was rejected by the British elements of the Soviet government, specifically Yuri Andropov, and we've been living the consequences of that decision ever since. Since LaRouche's 1983 SDI proposal, there have been a handful of attempts from Russia to re-engage the United States in a similar program, but with little luck. In 2007, Vladimir Putin and his wife flew to Kennebunkport, Maine, to meet with then-President George W. Bush, wife Laura Bush, and the former President George H.W. Bush and the former First Lady. Tension was mounting between Russia and the United States as the U.S. insisted on building its missile defense system in Czechoslovakia and Poland, under the pretense that the systems would be aimed at Iran. At that meeting, Putin proposed instead that a Europe-wide shield be created under joint NATO-Russian control. While Putin's intervention went a long way in the arena of diplomacy, there was never a serious response from the United States. As Barack Obama began his presidency in 2009, the U.S. missile defense system was still being constructed in Eastern Europe. However, Obama promised the Russians that he would agree to another START treaty, or a Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which, once signed in April of this year, required both powers to reduce their nuclear arsenals by roughly a third. This occurred just after the Reset Agreement, pioneered by Secretary of State Clinton and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, was made in March of 2009, agreeing to reset the strategic relationship between the two powers and move ahead. However, in recent weeks, in an incredibly hostile global environment, those agreements have broken down and are reported to have come to a dead end. RT reports that, despite the years of talks, Washington will not provide a legal guarantee that its anti-missile system in Europe will not hamper Russia's strategic potential. This prompted Dmitry Rogozin, Russian envoy to NATO, to assert, "All this must guarantee that the missile defense system in Europe will not weaken the Russian strategic potential. Moreover, the guarantees must be provided not only by the United States, but by NATO as a whole." He added that if the guarantees cannot be provided during Obama's tenure, they will be given under another administration. So, in order to break the gridlock over U.S.-Russia missile defense and outflank the suicidal insanity of the Obama administration, the Russians proposed a strategic defense of mankind from the top down. They brought back the SDI and proposed a space-based global system that would guard not only against missiles, but also against asteroids and other threats from space. The system outflanks the childish British Empire's war game of setting up missile defense shields merely to provoke volatile nations. It would be an integration of anti-aircraft, missile, and space defense, and would help to make war itself obsolete.